The Manatee was alive when Rachel Morales found her, but only in the way that counts the least. She was floating on her side in a shallow canal off the Homosassa River, in the kind of August heat that turns the water the color of dark tea and makes the air above it visible. Her body was partially submerged, one flipper breaking the surface in a slow, involuntary arc that was not swimming and was not rest. There was rope, commercial crab trap line, the orange braided kind, wrapped around her right flipper at the wrist joint and again around the base of her tail. And what that rope had done to the skin beneath it over the days or weeks it had been. There was something Rachel cataloged and then set aside in the specific compartment she had built over 23 years of marine wildlife response for things she would process later. The Manatee was a female, adult. Rachel estimated 9 feet, close to 1,000 pounds, large for a Florida manatee, the kind of animal that in good health could move through a river channel with a power that looked effortless and was not. Right now she was not moving at all, except for the involuntary flipper and her eyes, which were open and tracking. Rachel was a field coordinator with the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership out of Crystal River. She had been called by a kayaker who had spotted the animal from the water and had the sense to stop and call rather than approach, which was less common than it should have been. Rachel arrived with a basic response kit and a flat-bottomed skiff and one other responder, a newer volunteer named Dina Reyes, 23, who had been on 3 call-outs before this one, none of them this serious. "Call Crystal River," Rachel said when she saw the animal. "Tell them I need a full response team and a transport sling. Tell them the entanglement is around the flipper and the peduncle. Tell them I cannot wait." Dina made the call. The full team would be 45 minutes. The Manatee's right eye tracked Rachel as she eased into the water. The rope had been there long enough to begin cutting. That was the clinical description. The line around the tailstock, the peduncle, had compressed into the tissue, and the tissue had grown around it in the way that living things absorb what is imposed on them and incorporate it and keep going until they cannot. The line around the flipper wrist was less embedded but had caused a deep groove that was already infected. Warm to the touch, the skin raised and pale around the edges in the way that means the body has been fighting something for a while. Rachel did not have cutting tools adequate for the commercial line. She had told the partnership 3 times in the last 2 years that the standard response kit needed upgrading. She had the standard response kit. She used what she had: a dive knife, a pair of heavy shears from the kit's secondary compartment. The line around the peduncle took 11 minutes to cut because she could not put the Manatee under duress during the process. Any sharp stress response could send the animal into exertion she could not afford at her current oxygen status, and a Manatee under severe physiological stress can aspirate in shallow water. Rachel worked in intervals, a few cuts, then stillness, one hand resting flat on the Manatee's side to monitor breathing. Manatees must surface to breathe every 3 to 5 minutes on average, less often at rest, and this animal was not at rest in any meaningful sense. The Manatee did not thrash. She held mostly still, the involuntary flipper arc continuing its slow rhythm, and she breathed when Rachel moved away, the sound of her exhalation carrying across the flat water of the canal with the specific force of an animal working to stay alive. Dina, in the skiff above, did not say anything. She had learned this from her first call-out. Some of what happens in the water is not helped by narration. Rachel named her Palma before the rope was off. She did not explain this to Dina. The full response team arrived in 41 minutes, which was 4 minutes faster than the estimate, and the best 41 minutes Rachel had spent waiting for anything in recent memory. Dr. Luz Villanueva from the Clearwater Marine Aquarium arrived with them. She had been on the road already for a different call-out and had diverted when the severity of the entanglement came through on the radio, She was 51, deliberate, and she had more Manatee rehabilitation experience than anyone in the state of Florida who was not named by a plaque at a research institution. She got into the water with Rachel and did not speak for 3 minutes while she assessed. Then, the peduncle injury is the primary concern. She has rope burn down to the dermis in 2 places. The infection in the flipper is secondary, manageable with aggressive antibiotic treatment. But if the peduncle wound reaches the underlying fascia, we are talking about a much longer recovery and a much less certain outcome. "What is your read on her overall condition?" Rachel said. "She is hypoxic. She has been exerting to stay at the surface, and it is costing her." Dr. Villanueva looked at the Manatee's eye, which was still tracking. "She has been fighting this for at least a week, possibly 2. "The tissue growth around the line suggests 2, Rachel said. "Yes." "Doctor." Villanueva put her hand flat on Palma's side, in the same place Rachel had been monitoring. She held it there. "She did not give up," she said. It was not sentiment. It was a clinical observation about the animal's systemic condition. An animal that had given up physiologically would not be tracking them, would not be breathing with this consistency. "Let us get her loaded." The transport to the Clearwater Marine Aquarium took 2 hours by road, Palma in a foam-lined sling in the back of the response vehicle, Dr. Villanueva riding with her, Rachel following in the skiff truck. During transport, the monitoring logged 2 episodes of elevated respiratory rate that resolved without intervention. When they arrived, the rehabilitation pool was ready, heated to match the Homosassa River temperature to reduce shock, the water quality adjusted, the team on deck. They lowered Palma into the pool at 4:47 p.m. She sank, touched bottom, pushed off, and surfaced. She breathed. Someone on the rehabilitation deck said something quiet. Rachel did not hear what it was. The first week was the one Dr. Villanueva called the honest week, meaning it would tell them what was actually true about the animal's recovery trajectory, without the interference of initial shock or the optimism of early response. The peduncle wound was cleaned and dressed under light sedation on day 2. The infection in the flipper was aggressive, a gram-negative bacterial culture that required a combination antibiotic protocol that Dr. Villanueva adjusted 3 times in the first 10 days based on culture results. The hypoxia resolved within 48 hours. The wound did not progress to the fascia. On day 8, a manatee specialist from the U.S. Geological Survey's Serenia project visited to consult. His name was Dr. Marco Ellison. He was 44, and he had a specific concern that he raised directly with Dr. Villanueva and Rachel together. "The peduncle wound is healing," he said, "but the scar tissue formation is going to affect her hydrodynamic efficiency. We will not know by how much until she is mobile enough to assess. If the impairment is significant, it changes the release calculus." "Define significant," Rachel said. "A manatee's tailstock drives all primary propulsion. If scar tissue restricts range of motion by more than 20%, her ability to navigate current, to travel, to access feeding grounds in a winter cold snap, all of that is compromised." He paused. "I am not saying she cannot be released. I am saying we should not assume she will be." This was the conversation Rachel had known was coming. She had known it since she cut the last piece of rope off in the canal and felt the extent of the damage through her fingertips. She had named the animal Palma, and she had known then that naming was a decision about her own involvement, and she had made it anyway. "We assess when she is mobile," Rachel said. "We make the call on evidence, not on projection." Dr. Ellison accepted this. He was not a man who projected more than the data warranted. Palma began swimming on day 16. Not powerfully, cautiously, the way a large animal relearns a movement it has always known after an injury has redrawn the internal map of what is possible. She moved along the perimeter of the rehabilitation pool in slow circuits, surface breathing at regular intervals, the right rear portion of her body moving with a slight asymmetry that the underwater cameras documented for later analysis. The rehabilitation team fed her romaine lettuce, floating it in clusters at the surface. Florida manatees are obligate herbivores. Seagrass in the wild, romaine and leafy greens in rehabilitation, consumed at a rate that, for a healthy adult, can approach 150 pounds of vegetation per day. Palma ate on day 17 modestly, on day 18 less modestly. By day 23, the feeding records showed she was consuming at roughly 60% of the expected rate for her body weight, which Dr. Villanueva classified as encouraging. She is choosing to invest in her own recovery, Dr. Villanueva told Rachel during a monitoring call. That matters. She was choosing to stay alive for 2 weeks in that canal before anyone found her, Rachel said. A pause. Yes, Dr. Villanueva said. She has a history of that. If you are watching this for the first time, this channel exists to tell stories exactly like this one. Stories that do not clean up the difficult parts. We post every week. Subscribe and stay with us for what happened at Palma's 60-day assessment, because the room was divided, and what Rachel said in that room changed the outcome. The 60-day assessment happened in October. Dr. Villanueva presented the data. Peduncle wound closed, scar tissue formation moderate, right flipper wound resolved, full range of motion recovered. Hydrodynamic efficiency measured via timed swim trials in the rehabilitation pool. 83% of pre-injury baseline by the model's best estimate. Dr. Ellison had set 20% impairment as his threshold of concern. The assessment put Palma at 17. She is above the threshold, Rachel said. Marginally, Dr. Ellison said. The model has a confidence interval. The true value could be anywhere from 12 to 22% impairment. The midpoint is 17. The midpoint is 17, he agreed. But a manatee navigating the Crystal River system in January, when water temperatures drop and animals are competing for warm water refugia, that is not the same as a swim trial in a controlled pool. The margin matters. Dr. Villanueva said, she has been gaining weight consistently. Her behavior is exploratory. She is not showing the flat effect we see in animals that are not recovering. Her immune markers are within normal range. She has been ready to leave this pool for 3 weeks, and I think she knows it. You think she knows it, Dr. Ellison said. He was not being dismissive. He genuinely wanted to know what that observation was based on. She has been following the outflow pipe, Dr. Villanueva said. The pipe that leads to the external tank. She moves along it 3 or 4 times per day and sits at the end of it. She has been doing this for 2 weeks. A silence in the room. That is behavioral, Dr. Ellison said. It is not physiological data. No, Dr. Villanueva agreed. But I am presenting it as data. Rachel had not said anything during this exchange. She was looking at the printout of the swim trial results. 83%. The rope had been around Palma's tail for 2 weeks and she was at 83%. I want to do an open water trial, she said, before we make a final decision on release. A controlled open water trial GPS tag monitoring team. Let her show us what the pool cannot show us. Dr. Ellison was quiet for a moment. That is not standard protocol. No, Rachel said, but the standard protocol was written for animals that have not already demonstrated what this one has demonstrated. Put her in the Homosassa River for 6 hours with a tracker and a monitoring boat and let her show us her efficiency and current. Then we make the call. They ran the open water trial on a Thursday in November. in a section of the Homosassa that Rachel knew well enough to describe from memory. Palma was transported in the sling, lowered into the river at 7 a.m., and the GPS tag pulsed every 90 seconds. She surfaced immediately, breathed, dove. The monitoring boat tracked her for 6 hours. She covered 11 kilometers. She navigated 2 current transitions and the intersection with a boat channel without incident. She fed on seagrass beds at the 3-hour mark. Wild seagrass, not the romaine she had been eating for months, the real thing, for 40 minutes before moving on. At the 5-hour mark, she rested in a warm water spring discharge at the edge of the river system, floating in the current with her eyes half closed, the specific posture of a manatee that is precisely where it should be. Dr. Ellison was on the monitoring boat. He watched the GPS track populate on the tablet in his hand, and he did not say anything for a long time. At hour 6, they retrieved her for the return transport. She did not make it easy. Not because she was distressed, because she did not want to leave the spring. 83% in a pool, Rachel said on the boat, watching the sling team work. 100% in a river. Doctor. Ellison put the tablet down. Schedule the release, he said. They released Palma on a Tuesday in December in the same section of the Homosassa where the trial had been run. The water temperature was 68 degrees, cold enough to matter, warm enough to be survivable. 6 members of the rehabilitation team were there. Dr. Villanueva, Dr. Ellison, who had driven 2 hours from Gainesville. Rachel lowered herself into the water beside the sling and she put her hand flat on Palma's side, the way she had done in the canal in August in the same place. Palma breathed. The sound of it carried across the river. They opened the sling and Palma was in the water, and then she was deeper, and then she was gone. The GPS tag pulsed twice in the monitoring app, then a third time, farther south. Rachel stayed in the water for a while after everyone else had climbed back into the boats. She did not explain this, and nobody asked her to. The GPS tag had a 6-month battery. In those 6 months, Palma's movements were logged by the Serenia Project monitoring database and cross-referenced against known Manatee movement patterns in the Crystal River and Homosassa systems. She wintered in the warm water spring system at the upper Homosassa, a documented aggregation site where manatees congregate during cold water events, sometimes in groups of 200 or more. The tag confirmed she was accessing feeding grounds in the lower river system during mild weather and retreating to the springs when temperatures dropped. She was alive. She was moving. The track looked like a wild manatee's track. The tag went dark in June. Rachel checked the monitoring app on the morning it stopped reporting, and then she did not check again. The data was in the Serenia Project archive. It would be there. She had other call-outs. The 2nd year passed without Palma data. The 3rd year, the 4th. Rachel's call-out log for those years included 47 entanglement responses, 17 cold stress rescues, 9 watercraft strike cases. She kept a running record of every animal she handled. She had learned early in her career that the record was the thing. The record was what remained when memory softened or sharpened events in ways that were not accurate. In her personal log, separate from the official record, she kept one notation for each animal she named. 41 entries over 23 years. Most of them had a status beside the name: released, deceased, transferred, non-releasable, managed care, released, outcome unknown. Palma's entry said released, December, river trial. December, 83% in the pool, 100% in the river. Tag dark June, status unknown. She read it sometimes, not often. The photo ID match came in on a Wednesday in April, 4 years and 4 months after Palma's release. The Manatee Individual Photo Identification System, a database maintained by the Mote Marine Laboratory, uses natural scar and marking patterns unique to each animal, the way fingerprints are used for humans. Manatees accumulate scars from watercraft strikes, entanglements, and the general contact of life in a river system, and those scars persist and are logged by researchers, tourboat operators, kayakers, and citizen scientists uploading photos to the database. A wildlife photographer named Elena Sutherland had been working the Homosassa spring system in late March. She submitted 43 photos from a single morning dive session. The photo ID system matched one of them to a manatee in the Rehabilitation archive. The match was Palma. The photograph showed a large female manatee at approximately 6 feet of depth, oriented toward the camera, moving slowly through the column of light from the spring vent. The scar pattern on her peduncle was unmistakable. The database match confidence was 94%. The characteristic rope scar at the tailstock showed as a pale, smooth ridge against the darker skin around it, healed completely, permanent. She was 9 feet long. The database estimated her weight at over 1,000 pounds. Beside her, visible at the edge of the frame, was a smaller animal. A calf, new by the size estimate weeks old, moving in the uncoordinated exploratory way of a manatee calf that has not yet learned what the current does. Elena Sutherland had submitted the photos as routine citizen science documentation. She received a form email acknowledging receipt. 6 weeks later, she received a longer email from the Serenia Project, and then a phone call from Dr. Marco Ellison, who explained the significance of the match and asked her if she would be willing to share the full resolution originals for the archive. She said yes. She asked who the manatee was. He told her the case history and summary. The canal, the rope, the 11 hours, the pool trial and the river trial and the December release. How did she do? Elena asked. After they released her? We just found out, Dr. Ellison said. Rachel received the photo ID match in a forwarded email from the Serenia Project database team. The subject line said, ID match, archive case 2019-CR-047. She opened it on her phone in the parking lot of a gas station in Inverness, on her way back from a cold stress call-out in the lower Crystal River. The photo loaded slowly on the phone screen. The spring water, the column of light, the large female moving through it with the ease of an animal that has been in this water all its life. The pale ridge at the tailstock, the calf at the edge of the frame. Rachel sat in the parking lot for a while. The engine was running. Outside, the flat Florida landscape sat in the early afternoon heat the way it always did. Without drama, without punctuation, the long grass and the cypress and the sky that goes on longer than seems necessary. She typed a message to Dr. Villanueva. Photo ID match on Palma. Alive, Calf confirmed, sending the file. She sat another moment, then added, She is in the Homosassa spring system. She went back to the springs. Dr. Villanueva's reply came in 3 minutes. Of course she did. Elena Sutherland returned to the Homosassa spring system in November of the same year and logged a manatee matching Palma's scar pattern on 2 separate dive sessions. The calf from April was with her on the 1st. On the 2nd, the calf was not visible, old enough to be ranging independently by the November timeline. The photo from the 2nd session showed Palma alone, resting in the warm water column above the spring vent, her body in the half-present posture of an animal between breathing and dreaming. Her right flipper hung slightly lower than the left. Not a dysfunction, just the characteristic resting position of a flipper that had been rewired by scar tissue and found its own equilibrium. Her eyes were half open. The water around her was the specific clear blue of the Florida spring system, the kind of water that has been underground for centuries and arrives at the surface at a constant 68 degrees regardless of what the air is doing, regardless of what the river is doing, regardless of what the world above the water is doing to itself. She breathed. The surface above her moved. She did not.